Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special council meeting in the town of Oakville. This meeting has been called to consider Bill 73 and what we know about it and what we think about it. And Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets for this meeting?
We have regrets from Councillor Noel.
All right, thank you, and welcome everyone else. Council, although it doesn't call for going into committee of the whole, given what we're doing, it might be appropriate. Would you like to resolve into committee of the whole? Councillor Duddick moves, Councillor Giddings seconds. All in favor? Opposed, if any? We are in committee of the whole. And Mr. Green? Mr. Lalonde? Ms. Childs?
I have my assistant is
Ms.
going to bring up
Weiss.
a very important slide for you in about 15 seconds or so.
Hopefully we'll have some technical support.
Oh, there we are. So this afternoon we have some presentations. I hope you find them interesting. There'll be two major presentations. The first will be on proposed amendments to the Planning Act, and that will be led by Joanne and Diane. And then we have a second presentation which will be on amendments to the Development Charges Act, and that will be led by Doug and Nancy. And we've structured it as a dialogue. So we were trying to think about sort of how to give you the information and then give you all of the yes buts. So there'll be one participant that gives you sort of the state of the world, and then another that gives you the yes buts. We encourage you to ask questions as we go through, but if you want to get into a discussion, we'd like you to hold it till the end of each of the two presentations. And with that, I'll pass it over to my two colleagues.
Thank you. So to start off with, I thought we'd give you a little bit of context for the amendment before us. In the fall of 2013, the province initiated a review of the land use planning and appeals system and the development charges system. An 80-day consultation period was launched on October 24th, 2013 and concluded January 10th, 2014. On March the 5th, Bill 73, the proposed Smarts Growth for Our Communities Act 2015, was introduced to amend the Development Charges Act and the Planning Act. When looking at the timeline, in October 2013, as I mentioned, it was launched. In November 2013, staff from Finance and Planning attended provincial open houses and roundtable discussions. In December, the Halton Area Planning Partnership, better known as HAP, completed a joint response document and submitted it to the province. In January, Town Council heard staff reports from both Planning and Finance on input to the province on the review. Finally, in March, as I mentioned, you heard the first reading was met for Bill 73. With respect to the proposed changes to the Planning Act, Joanna and I will provide an overview and the potential implications on harmonization of provincial plans, restrict automatic rights of appeals, increase minimum standards for public consultation, decision timeframes, dispute resolutions, development permit system, Section 37, or bonusing, as we know it more commonly, parkland dedication, minor variances, and the timing of employment review. With respect to the harmonization of provincial plans and policy reviews, the issue is that there's a continuous cycle of reviews. You finish one and you start the other. To alleviate this issue, the province, through the proposed Bill 73 amendment, extends the review of policy statements to every 10 years, where currently it's 5, and with respect to the official plan review, it's also extended to 10 years after the plan comes into full force and effect, and 5-year intervals thereafter.
What this will mean for the town is that we'll see a longer time period between the massive hearings that we've seen for the implementation of these new policies and their trickle down to town policies and other regulations. What that will mean would be a cost savings to the town for reduced litigation, but also you'd have a better time frame to see the results of those policy initiatives with the time period available to see the actual development of whatever policy changes are introduced. And that also gives the public some certainty as to what policies are in effect for a greater period of time so decisions can be made on those policies.
Next. The issue is that appeals considered as of right undermines the authority of the local municipality over planning decisions. Bill The proposed Bill 73 amendment specifically says site-specific official plan amendments will not be permitted unless initiated by a municipality for 2 years of a new official plan being in full force and effect. Global appeals of a new official plan will not be permitted. An explanation in a notice of appeal is required for appeals of specific official plan sections, and some official plan appeals will not be permitted at all.
What that will mean for the town is a couple good things. There will be fewer appeals to the official plans during those periods because of the cooling off period that will be introduced, which, like the previous slide, will provide some cost savings to the town. However, what this also could mean is that there may be more protective appeals when the new official plans come out, and those policies might be seen to be something to be appealed for just in case purposes. And also for the purposes of what has actually been provided in this bill, you may see some interesting legal quirks where you may appeal the whole plan but for maybe the title section or just minor sections. So you in essence have a global appeal. That may still mean that we need to bring scoping motions and that sort of proceeding in those policies, but we won't know until the act comes into effect.
You said you'd welcome questions during. What about the piece you mentioned earlier that you had to give you had to be precise about what you were appealing? Does that in any way act to reduce the threat of protective appeals and frivolous appeals?
Though the act already requires you to give reasons for your appeal, the policies that Diane was mentioning earlier those provisions, what they do is you're required to give reasons why a policy may conflict or be inconsistent with provincial policies. So that's a specific type of argument that's being made. So it may work to lessen it, but it may not.
Another proposed change is to increase minimum standards for public consultation. The issue, obviously, is that the current regulations are out of date. Through Bill 73, it's proposed that Municipal Planning Advisory Committee for upper and single-tier municipalities will contain at least one member that must be a resident of the municipality and not a member of council or a municipal employee. Alternative measures and procedures related to public consultation contained with the official plan expanded to include plans of subdivision and consents, where previously it was only for official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments. Approval notice required to contain an explanation of how the public's written and oral submissions were considered needs to be part of it.
Now, before you hurry away from that, the first thing, the Municipal Planning Advisory Committee, is that if you have one or that you must have one?
I believe, to your worship, I think it's my understanding it's for upper tier and single tier, and I think you have to have one. They all do, and you have to have. Most of them are structured in a way that there is somebody from the general public on them, at least one member.
So in terms of what this means for the town, we actually have really excellent community consultation practices already that are above the minimum standards that were already previously in the Planning Act. However, some of the, particularly the last item that Diane addressed, there is a significant administrative burden on the town in the implementation of one of these provisions. The Act will specify that anytime you make a decision on a matter, the town will have to keep track of how each type of submission, whether written or oral, influenced that decision being made. So that may slow down the proceedings because we'll have to also decide how any individual submission has an impact on decisions. And that's not just for council, that's actually for committee of adjustment as well. So again, that might slow down meetings and there might be longer time periods for decision-making processes in order to articulate how each submission impacts the final decision. And unfortunately, even though that is quite an administrative burden, there doesn't seem to be in the Act a corollary in the benefit for appeals later. We've all had to have these submissions since Bill 51 get forwarded to the Ontario Municipal Board, and the board has traditionally, or as a result of Bill 51, been required to have regard to council decision-making, but it would appear that this change to the Act doesn't actually give further weight to council decision-making processes, but again, causes a lot lot of administrative burden that will have to be looked at for how we would actually implement.
Decision timeframes. A 90-day extension is proposed to the current 180-day period for an approval authority to make a decision with respect to all or part of an official plan. The extension can be requested by a person, public body, a municipality, or approval authority.
So as Diane said, this can actually be granted for up to 90 days, and it's only a possibility. That extension would give the approval authority more time to make a decision without the risk of having an appeal of a non-decision during that time frame. But the risk during that time period is that the person or body who grants that extension is able to revoke that extension at any time with written notice. So that is something to consider if using those types of extensions. If you're the approval authority, it's certain bodies can grant you that permission, or in the alternative, if it was the region making a decision, we could grant them that extension. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's just the official plan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
While Joanna looks that up, I think it's worth noting that this is just with respect to an official plan amendment or a new official plan. Or she's,
And that's what I'm talking, right now it's
Okay.
180 days for an OPA.
right.
And
Yes.
can I go to 270? I guess I'm thinking of a case where that maybe somebody else has ragged the puck. 180 days are up, bingo, they go to the OMB immediately, even though we haven't got the information requested. I'm just trying to figure how this new proposed amendment would change that.
We can request an extension.
Of the approval authority.
Yeah, we can say, can we?
Mhm.
Yeah, so we can request it, I believe. What you said?
Not of ourselves.
No.
Well, you can get back to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, on that, through you, Mr. Chair, on that same note, if you can even just provide us, and maybe you don't have that information as yet, what the criteria are in terms of being permitted, like in other words, what's the burden of proof?
Burden of proof for the extension?
Yes.
There is no burden of proof, it just can be given to the approval authority.
I guess I'm playing devil's advocate. Why would they deny it to us?
They don't, someone might want to appeal the matter, so they don't want to give you further time.
So I guess what we're missing here is who's they?
The Act says in the case of one of these amendments, that a person, public or public body can make the request. So I would say to the approval authority. So if in this case, the council would be the approval authority, so it would be the person or public body who made the, it could be the person who made the OPA application or an approval authority to us as the approval authority. I don't think we can give ourselves the extension.
We can clarify that to, let us look around a little more.
If you want to read that sentence again?
The 180-day period may be extended in accordance with the following rules. In the case of an amendment requested under Section 22, the person or public body that made the request may extend the period for up to 90 days by written notice to the approval authority.
That's going to need some work. Have they had any submissions on this?
I don't believe yet that it's gone to debates or discussion.
Maybe we'd like to make some submissions to the, at second reading.
Through your worship, we can definitely seek some clarification with the ministry on that and ask them for some more details. Duly noted.
But many of us are making a little list of things we might want to submit to the province for its further consideration. All right, please continue.
I just wanted to note that as we were getting ready for this presentation, we had anticipated that there may be things that you want us to follow up on in the form of reports or perhaps other avenues. And so we would, make your list and we'll follow up with you.
So with respect to dispute resolutions, alternative resolution permissions are proposed to give decision makers the ability to use mediation and other dispute resolution techniques in certain appeals.
Again, what that will mean for the town is that there is a time frame that we can delay sending appeals that are filed with us to the Ontario Municipal Board. Right now, when someone wants to make an appeal of a decision, they actually file that appeal package with us, and then we are required under the Act to forward that to the board within 15 days. This will give us a time frame, 2 months, that we can actually hold that before sending it to the board, and it's not until you send it to the board that the board's proceedings are commenced to try to resolve the matters. This will actually have some administrative things that we have to consider. One of those is having authority to engage in those types of negotiations, and it may be the case that there might be delegated authority to initiate those types of things, or we may look at a case-by-case basis and pass resolutions in conjunction with decisions that are being made that in the event of an appeal we could enter into those types of negotiations.
So with respect to the development permit systems, the proposed change is to allow the minister to make an order requiring a local municipality to adopt a development permit system. Further, upper tier municipalities may also be required by minister's order to make bylaws imposing similar requirements on their lower tier municipalities.
There's traditionally not been a lot of take-up of the development permit system provisions that have been in the Act. There hasn't been a lot of incentive to do so. There are processes that are subject to potential appeals. There's a lot of upfront cost and problems that come with them that it's not clear whether there is an actual advantage on the other side. This change to the Act will actually give the minister and the region the ability to force and impose upon the town to create such a system, even where it might not be a system that the town would on its own decide to undertake. That would definitely have cost and resource implications for staff.
I think maybe the public would benefit from an explanation as to what a development permit system is and who it favors.
Describe it? No?
Yeah.
A developed permit system is a system under the Act that allows you to essentially pre-zone certain things, and you can do different types of development permit systems. One that I'm aware of that's actually taking place right now is, I believe, in Brampton, and they're combining some of the heritage into the system. What it should mean on the other side is that an applicant could come in and much more quickly get to the point where they can pull a building permit, and there's a lot more certainty on those properties. But what it means for staff and the municipality is that you actually have to look at all those properties and decide what can be included to have an automatic, have these to lessen the number of procedural things you have to do in order to get a building permit.
So is there a potential advantage to our municipality to have a development permit system where the incentive to applicants is that they get a faster approval? The incentive to us is we get tighter and closer performance to our stated policies and rules? You know, the clear rules, is this the clear rules idea?
It's my understanding through the development permit system, one of the reasons that a lot of municipalities haven't actually gone through with doing it, it's a lot of administrative work to do up front. And yes, you would get certainty, but once it's done, and all the work is done up front for the approvals, and then it goes down basically to staff. There's good and bad with it.
If we're going to be compelled to have it, I believe the public here is going to want a careful list of the good and the bad, just to know what's being done to us.
We definitely could put some general information on the planning website to help people understand what a development permit system is, if you would like. With respect to Section 37, more commonly known as bonusing, the changes proposed is that money collected under Section 37 will be required to be kept in a special account and spent only for facilities, services, and other matters specified in the bylaw. The treasurer would be required to make an annual financial statement.
And that will impact us because we currently do not keep that type or make those types of reports at the moment. So there will be significant implications on an administrative side for tracking those funds, what they're being used for, and making those detailed reports. That is somewhat of a benefit to the public, though. There's transparency in the collection and use of that fund. However, it also may attract scrutiny or criticism over the very same thing.
Oh, sorry.
Doesn't Section 37 refer to bonusing and how they're really cutting that dollar-wise, which kind of impacts us very majorly?
Through your worship, I think you're implying the parkland dedication. Bonusing,
Yes.
it's just the bonusing is where they apply for 2 additional stories. We've identified areas in our official plan where we would accept bonusing, and in response, we would get some monies for some public benefit in the area. That's what the bonusing is for.
Yeah, but I thought, aren't they changing what we are able to collect also?
No, they are not.
Okay, I thought they were changing the bonusing of what we could get going
No.
forward.
Not
Thank
to
you.
my knowledge.
Okay.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you. I've been very fond of Section 37. You mentioned in the report that other than transit, there's a lot of things that we had asked for that were not given to us. Could you just quickly run through those headlines of what we weren't given that we'd asked for?
Are you referring to the development permit side?
I believe, I'm really sorry, I read this quickly last night, waiting at the airport for somebody. But you'd mentioned that there were some asks that were made during, I believe it was Section 37, that we had during our consultation phase, that we were not seeing now.
I'm not seeing exactly what you're referring to.
Councillor, would you like to
I'll
take?
turn this into an intelligent question offline.
Okay,
Thank you. Councillor Hutchins?
thank you.
All righty. All righty then. It might be helpful for the public to understand how little Section 37 we've ever done here, and how this is not in Oakville, not a big amount of money. Mr. Lalonde, Mr. Green, you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Really, a lot of where the issues are coming out of this Section 37 are really not the issues that we've had in Oakville. It's been very modest use. We've targeted exactly what it is we're looking for, and then we've employed the Section 37 money. For example, Kerr Street with the one development, Rain, which I believe is now Census, Section 37 money was taken for facade upgrades on Kerr Street. So we decided what the bonusing would be for and where we targeted the money to be used, and we are tracking how that money is being used. What has happened in a number of municipalities, some of the larger ones, could be a place like Toronto, have taken Section 37, goes into a very large pool, and then is used. What I would think the building industry has looked at is fairly indiscriminately. So what the legislation is trying to do is tighten up the transparency and the targeting of Section 37. So I think largely we have honored and respected the Section 37 process. But as you say, we've not used it an awful lot because we don't really have that, generally, that amount of high-rise development. But as we go forward with our areas of intensification, it will likely come into play more often.
Thank you very much. Councilor O'Meara.
Thanks. I'm just looking for some clarification in terms of what Section 37 money and cash in lieu of parkland dedication money can be used for, or are those the same thing?
They're two completely different things.
So are the rules guiding what their uses are different as well then?
They're totally different.
Can I understand what those differences are then, if that's okay? Maybe Mayor, if you're, thanks.
Section 37 is where in exchange for some special allowance when a company is putting together a proposal, they get a special, they get more activity in return for paying some money for that, which we would dedicate to public goods. So as Ray said, a typical example would be, as Ray has mentioned, you put another story on a building and you take, the developer gives you some money, and then that money is spent on a public good. So it might be a facade improvement on Kerr Street, it might be a child care center, it might be an expansion to a facility such as a library. The cash in lieu is a formula that has changed significantly that we'll get to when we do the DC presentation. Cash in lieu is a provision by which when you build a high density building, you have to assign a certain amount of funding to buy parkland for the people who would be using that facility to make use of. And that has changed substantially, but they're two entirely different regimes, and we'll be talking about the cash in lieu in some detail because there's some significant changes to it when we do the DC part.
Okay, Councilor Hutchins.
Can I just add one more thing perhaps to the Section 37, just to be clear. When we look at increased density or increased height in terms of bonusing, it's not an unrestricted. So the town will set a limit, which within the planning approvals, you can bring the certain height or density, and you do that without Section 37. When you get into the way we've applied it at the town for bonusing, we may identify that you can have up to, say, 3 more stories or a certain density to a max. There still is a cap, so it's not an unlimited amount of bonusing use.
Just further to that one thing, we also specify what the taking is. We have a formula that says, and it's this much money for this much increased activity. Parkland dedication, cash in lieu of parkland is about parkland, but there's so many changes that we'd better wait for that than to get into it now. And then I have Councillor Hutchins and then Councillor Elgar.
Yes. Does this mean in Section 37 that if there's bonusing on a particular area that the money's tracked so that it's only spent in that area, or it can be spent across the town?
This provision says that we have to report on how that money is spent. And as Ray has mentioned, I think that's in response to municipalities where they have not been that clear. When we negotiate a Section 37 agreement, we're very specific about the amount and the focus of the funds. And there's no question in anybody's mind who's associated with that of where those fundings are going. In some municipalities, that is not the case, and we think that this provision is in response to that.
Put a finer point on it. You could spend them somewhere else, but you got to tell people you did it. And if you do that, under this rule, the intention is that the area that is having the increase and not getting the money is going to descend on you. So it'll be policed by the public, so to speak. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just similar, maybe I was under the misconception earlier about parkland dedication, as was Councillor O'Meara, but when I read the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, under Section 73, which is what we're talking about today, they're saying the bill would also make the development charges Section 37 density bonusing and parkland dedication systems more predictable, transparent, and accountable. So like I can see, that's why parkland does kind of weave into the whole thing under Bill 73 with Section 37.
Well, but what you're reading is a summary of the intent, and they've batched together different places that they're intending to make it more transparent. And when we get to parkland dedication, you're going to see how they're doing it there.
Yeah, and that's why Bill 73 is supposedly threading all together with Section 37 and the Development Charges Act.
Right. Bill 73 gives you these changes in 37, and when we get to parkland dedication changes, you'll be, I believe, impressed with how much change is being contemplated.
Yeah, but it's not pretty.
That's the shorter way of saying it.
Next. You'd be happy to know next is parkland dedication. The proposed changes to the Planning Act with respect to parkland dedication include a parks plan that examines the parkland needs in the municipality is required before a municipality may set an alternative parkland conveyance requirement. The calculation of payment in lieu is revised from 1 hectare per 300 dwelling units to 1 hectare per 500 dwelling units. The treasurer of a municipality would be required to make an annual financial statement relating to a special account that the payment in lieu funds are deposited. This statement is to be made available to the public.
So like the Section 37 side, that does provide further transparency and accountability in the use of the parkland funds. Though it does reduce the town's ability to potentially fund parks in the manner that it desires, because the 1 for 500 limit will actually automatically apply to our bylaw and other municipalities' bylaws that have set it at the old rate of 1 for 300.
So is that parkland? Because we have
That's
a question on parkland. Councillor Giddings.
With the change to 1 to 300, I assume that, was that number, are you aware, was it suggested through one of the associations, or there's been a lot of discussion about this or in the press?
Through your worship, it's my understanding that the province had over 1,200 submissions, and they would be from the general public, the building industry, municipalities, et cetera. And I'm not sure exactly where that number came from.
Is the only way that I could see this being possible, are they looking at, you know, units used to be a certain size, now they're about 60% of it, so it's the same. I'm just trying to come to grips, because it's a massive change for us.
Absolutely, it's quite significant. Through your worship, it's my understanding the development industry has pushed back about the built boundary and the whole, some of the good intent of the growth plan to say that it's too expensive. The performance don't work for intensification. So maybe I'm speculating a little bit.
Yeah.
It could be in response to some of that.
I can give you better than speculation. The building and land development industry submitted a very long paper to the province in the consultation for this. They were looking to be excused entirely from this. This is the province's idea of a compromise. So, you know, in terms of how you get to the number, this is a 40% change, right? And when we had this before us last year, staff assured us that it's written to mean that it's changing to 1 per 500 whether you take cash or land. And in repeated meetings with the minister and ministry staff, they have, as late as last week, assured me that they intended it to mean that 1 for 500 would only apply where you take cash, and where you take land, 1 for 300 would continue to apply. The matter remains unresolved. I continue to prefer. I'm relying on the reading that the staff are giving me of the 1 for 500 applying to both, and pressing for the province to make it clear in the bill, rather than relying on this intent response that we're getting. But I haven't had a commitment from them to change it. But I believe it's very important. It'd be very interesting on a comeback basis, on a future report basis, to talk about our ability to require them to give us land. I'm contemplating a case where, let's take Senses as an example, where they didn't have enough land to give us any land. And does the act allow us to require land? Does that, you know, do we wind up in a funny place where this town conceivably says to a developer, well, fine, we don't want your money, we want 1 for 300 or 1 for X hundred land, and if you can't give us the land, I guess you don't have enough land. Mr. Green?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. One of the things that I've been in discussions with Jane Closey is actually bringing back a comprehensive report on the whole cash and lieu, because I think there's a great number of issues we need to have a look at. I can tell you when at the 1 for 300, which we had in the past without this change, when we did the last parks and recreation and library master plan, one of the things that we looked at with the intensification is what sort of parkland would we need that matches there. And I believe it was something in the order with our intensification numbers that we would need about 33 hectares of land, and when you looked at the amount of intensification that we were anticipating, the 1 for 300 actually matched quite well. To the point of the 1 for 500, absolutely, this was responding to pressure from build, but I believe there was also some analysis done, and I won't talk to the rigor of that analysis, that looked at the issue of smaller units, and therefore one could lower that because of the lower population that would be occupying. But all of a sudden now, reading the Globe and the Star over the last coming months, no longer are developers building the 400 and 500 square foot units because, you know, the kids now have got their accommodation. It's people with children now, and the industry is getting to larger condominium units to actually satisfy families moving into these areas. So we have to have a look at it. We have to have a look at it from the issue of whether it's land, the value, because the one thing that did not change was any cap that was put on the value of the land. So at the 1 for 300, what we had done in the past, if the land was at $2 million a hectare, our 1 for 300 was at the $2 million. In the one of the concerns we also had is that they'd be setting a cap on the units as well as a cap on the value of the land. So at this point in time, it's only a cap on that. But we do need to have a look at that, the impact on places like Midtown, Uptown, and Palermo, what that will be, and come forward with our recommendations.
Council, the one calculation is you take the diet of intensification that's set out in the Places to Grow plan that applies to Oakville, and you take the amount of money that we would have collected under 1 for 300 and the amount of money that we would collect at 1 for 500, and you look at the next 16 years, which is the life of the plan, and you take the amount of intensification that we have and just arbitrarily spread it out over 16 years, the loss to us in money with which to provide parkland is about $6 million a year in one analysis, and you know, times 16 years, you're looking at something close to $100 million. You're looking at something pretty close to real money. So if this goes through and if we don't have alternatives, it's going to be the communities created under this, if it goes forward, will be poorer in parkland. I guess that's I don't believe that's debatable. That's the clear result of this effort.
Or you look at your parkland being remote from actually where the intensification is, because that's where your dollar would go farther. And that doesn't make a lot of sense either.
So one of the reasons we had this meeting was to try to illuminate, among others, this issue, because this is a biggie in terms of who Oakville, I mean, to keep Oakville, which is a really green community with a lot of park space, this is a bad development. Councilor Giddings.
In terms of feedback on this, the 1 to 300 versus the 1 to 500, any sense of whether a sliding scale based on the size of the unit may be appropriate, or may be a method of moving forward if we can move away from the 1 to 300, base it on the size of the units?
The Act, as it's currently written, is actually up to 1 for 300, and various municipalities have set different standards or methodologies for something less than 1 for 300. However, the Act permitted a municipality to go up to 1 for 300 to develop whatever parkland standard the municipality desired. This just sets a different rate as the highest amount.
As council, there are communities who've done none.
Yeah.
So developer-friendly are they?
Scary.
That just spawned a question in my mind. So some communities are none, but what is the range? So 300 is the max right now. And how many municipalities would be in the 300 range? Is it more commonly 300, or is it more commonly none or less?
I don't have the information for every GTA community, but here's your rule of thumb. The more in love they are with growth, the more likely they are to have excused the developers for high-rise from parkland dedication.
I hope AMO does a calculation of what this is worth across the province, because that would be a terrifying number.
Well, there's an underlying issue here of some communities don't care
Right.
the way, communities have different objectives. We have a green objective. There are communities that would like to be condo city.
Right.
We all revolve around one that's at the center of the GTA.
So does that mean that a municipality that's zero right now would have to be 500?
No,
Okay,
it continues to be up to.
Okay, because that wouldn't be so bad province-wide, but no, that's a disaster.
So what happens is the amount that you can go up to, the amount that you can go up to get is 40% lower now.
The proposed changes with respect to minor variances are that the Committee of Adjustment will be required to apply prescribed criteria when making a decision about minor variances. It should be noted that this prescribed criteria is still under review by the province. The decision of the committee must contain a brief explanation of the effect, if any, and how any written or oral submissions were considered as part of the decision. And finally, minor variance applications are not permitted for a 2-year period after an owner-initiated site-specific rezoning unless they get the approval of the local council.
So that's the end of delegating it away to the arm's length body. Councillor Hutchins.
Does this mean that there might be some attempt to define what minor is? So
Yes, we haven't seen a set of those regulations yet at all, but it's anticipated that minor variance will be included as some sort of way to define that.
And because the public may benefit from a brief explanation of what prescribed means and the speed with which the province can change regulations versus legislation.
Prescribed means that the Act will provide for a regulation to be promulgated that will set out further details and prescriptions for how that section in the Act would be interpreted. In terms of the speed, it's not clear when this regulation may be introduced or how quickly it'll be passed, but regulations can both move very quickly and very slowly.
But in the way Bill 73 reads, is it not true that it says the minister may prescribe regulations to do this?
Yes.
So in other words, a memo from, I'm making light of it a little bit here, but a memo from the minister rather than an act going through the legislature. So that means that conditions around you can change more often. It's one of the risks that this gives you. Gives the government more flexibility. It gives that government more flexibility, not us. But in terms of this community's interests in minor variance controls, because the average person doesn't understand why anybody should have any variance, it sometimes seems, this would seem to track toward that concern, right?
Definitely help.
Yes, just to follow up with the other implications of these changes, as I noted before, this will impose quite a burden on the Committee of Adjustment and the Secretary-Treasurers because just like council decisions, the Committee of Adjustment decisions will have to articulate how submissions, whether written or oral, impacted their decision that was made. The limits on the new zoning bylaw, site-specific zoning bylaws may attract more appeals, protective appeals, in order to address concerns up front rather than waiting until the minor variance time period is exhausted.
Is it also being sort of thought about for people, if the Committee of Adjustment, this minor variance is defined, and then they break it, are they going to clarify the appeal to it, make it cheaper to go to the OMB against the Committee of Adjustment if they step outside of the criteria?
Well, just like the 4 tests that currently exist, such a regulation that they're describing would either add a new test or a new layer in terms of whatever the required accounting and the decision for a Committee of Adjustment being made. This doesn't propose any changes to who can file an appeal, and this bill does not make any changes to the Ontario Municipal Board's requirements in terms of costs or timeframes.
Ms. Weiss, the councillor might, and the public for that matter, might appreciate a brief note to the effect that we could have a local appeal board under, for a number of years we've had that ability.
Yes, we could set up a local appeal board.
So, Councillor Giddings?
Yeah, further to that, Mr. Mayor, would that be captured under the dispute resolution, the alternative resolution model that is being considered?
Through your worship, it could be an example. The province did identify that was one of the outstanding things that they were going to look at and give us more detail on, the local appeal bodies.
Yeah, because they mentioned in certain appeals, so perhaps it captures this part of the process?
It's my understanding that there's more to come out
Sir,
with respect to the local appeal bodies. That's all they've said.
Okay.
More to come.
All right, thanks.
Just to be clear, we've elected not to have one because of the expense up to now. We've had the ability to interpose this for 8, 9 years, right?
That's correct, and not many people have taken up on it, obviously, because of the expense.
Okay. Carry forward.
Great. With respect to employment lands review, the requirement to review employment lands every 5 years in conjunction with an official plan review has been removed, and appeals to official plans are not permitted in relation to forecasted population and employment growth as allocated by the upper tier municipality's official plan.
Roll back one. Removal of the requirement to review employment lands every 5 years in conjunction with an OP review. Okay, they're not saying we can start flipping from employment to residential at all, right?
Not at all.
So they're saying the opposite. Nothing can be flipped. That's what I was afraid of. They're just saying the removal of the requirement to review.
Through your worship, right now under the Planning Act, we're required to look at our employment lands every 5 years.
Right.
They're switching that to every 10 years through the proposed changes.
Certain municipalities that you may know about have a custom of reviewing employment land and flipping it to residential. We might even be in a municipality that once did that a little bit.
Oh,
So that's not prevented, but the requirement that you review the employment land is removed. You're still free to review it. You're just not required.
Okay.
And the more interesting one is the second one on that slide, I thought, because if you remember when we were doing ROPA 38, Sustainable Halton, there was a lot of discussion in another 1 or 2 Halton municipalities about wanting more employment land than the province and the region thought wise. And this would appear, to my eye, to try to put a lid on that. Is that the intent here?
I think that would definitely assist. Are you referring to the strategic employment lands, perhaps?
I am. All right. And Alan and Tom and the rest of us on regional council at the time, you'll all remember that little discussion with Milton. All right. Keep going then.
So like the other changes, this will reduce the amount of litigation with regards to this, and it would provide some savings and resourcing and costs for those hearings. But it also provides policy certainty for the community to know what policies are in force and that there will be a continued commitment to whatever policies are in place.
Okay, it's me. So to conclude, with respect to changes to the Planning Act, I would say a number of, or the majority of the town identified concerns through us being involved with the provincial workshops and through submissions, have been addressed or partially addressed through Bill 73. The remaining concerns we hope can be addressed through the implementation of the bill once the bill comes into force. And however, we do want to raise the red flag that, and Nancy and Doug will talk more about it, that the bill presents a number of administrative burdens that do not appear to have benefit to the town.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Elgar may have a final question.
How do you see this tying in with what Ted McMeekin is saying he's going to do as a review of the whole OMB going forward? Because if you go back to the very beginning, it looks like the OMB is very much going to remain in place if you go back to where you can appeal things to. I think you said it would be the OMB you're really appealing to change something.
These changes don't make any changes to the Ontario Municipal Board Act. As we mentioned, there's a number of changes to what types of appeals might go to the Ontario Municipal Board. But there's two issues. There's what matters can be appealed under what circumstances, but also the workings of the Ontario Municipal Board and their resourcing constraints.
Yeah, I'm really hoping to learn more about this 90-day extension on top of the 180-day, because I think there's probably a DNA of an OMB in there.
Through you, Your Worship, Councillor Elgar, the only thing I'd like to add, in the fall of 2013, when they initiated this review, they specifically noted that they would not be talking about OMB reform at that time through this process. It would be a different process.
That's what McMeekin is going to do in the fall, when he said he's looking at a whole OMB review plan? That came out in March the 5th?
Through Your Worship, I hope so. All I know, it was not part of this review.
Councillor, the things that in here that you've noted that point toward the OMB, I think give you a clue that abolition of the OMB is not going to be part of that work.
That's exactly what I'm reading too, which isn't exactly what he's saying here. A full review of the OMB coming up in the near future.
So apparently the death penalty will not be part of the available tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both of you.
So that concludes the first part of our presentation, and now Doug and Nancy are going to present the DC work.
Good afternoon, Mayor Burton, members of council. As you've heard, Bill 73 amends two pieces of legislation, the Planning Act and the Development Charges Act. The bill is 39 sections long, and only 10 of those sections deal with the Development Charges Act, and that's the part that Nancy and I will be speaking to for the rest of the presentation. Now, Mayor Burton, as council is aware, development charges are a key component of funding new infrastructure required to service growth. The town's and this council's position has consistently been that it is a key principle that growth should pay for growth, and that any shortfall only serves to shift the burden of growth onto the existing tax base. The current Development Charges Act is coming up to 20 years old and has many restrictions and limitations that simply do not allow the full cost of growth to be recovered. These include ineligible services, mandatory discounts, service level restrictions, and mandatory exemptions. Due to such limitations, under the last DC bylaw, the town was able to recover only about 80% of the cost of growth-related infrastructure. However, as staff reported to you in January of last year, the province has indicated that it does not intend to make sweeping changes to to the development charges legislation. You will see that that is the case with respect to the proposed changes to the Development Charges Act under this bill. You will hear that there is some positive change proposed, but as you've also heard, there are also some significant additional administrative burdens, particularly with respect to increased reporting requirements on municipalities. The consistent theme that you will hear with respect to proposed changes to the Development Charges Act under the bill is that, in fact, much has been left for further clarification through the passage of provincial regulations that are yet to come. So on the slide before you, there's a number of points that we'll be covering off. The first is transit service. Now, as Council is aware, the Development Charges Act prescribes the method for determining the development charges that may be imposed. And as Council knows, the Act requires that for eligible services, as a kind of final line item, that capital costs must be reduced by 10%. However, the Act also provides a list of exemptions where that 10% reduction does not apply, such as water and wastewater supply services, services related to a highway, and police and fire protection services. Under Bill 73, it is proposed that transit would be added to this list of exemptions and would no longer be subject to the 10% capital cost reduction requirement. The service needs that are anticipated in preparation of a municipality's DC bylaw are also projected over certain forecast periods, which is 20 years for services related to a highway and fire services, and 10 years for all other services. It is possible that the regulations may include transit as a service to be measured over a longer period of time to better accommodate long-term needs for that service. The bill also contemplates that certain services to be prescribed under regulations will not be subject to the requirement of being limited to the average levels of service over the past 10 years, which would allow municipalities to plan for anticipated levels of those services over the following 10-year period. And it is anticipated that transit may be one of those prescribed services that will have a 10-year looking forward period as opposed to a 10-year backward looking period.
Oh, no, I went too far, probably. Okay. So, as Doug said, the current limitations of the Act have been specifically detrimental to transit for municipalities such as ours. So, for municipalities that are growing and want to expand their transit service, those limitations of having mandatory discounts, of looking at a historical 10-year average have been quite negative for us, and they haven't given us the funding envelope that we would need to expand our transit in accordance with our transportation master plan goals. Many of the details for these changes, though, will be worked out as they get ready to do the legislation, the regulations. So the province will be looking towards a working group, working through all of these details. We don't know yet whether transit will be a prescribed service. We assume it will be. But again, how the charge will be calculated hasn't been determined yet. That'll be the working group working through that. As well, is now that it may move towards a longer-term service, so if it becomes a 20-year service, and will it become a services related to a highway? Will we have a new transportation category, and what would that do to our roads DCs? We don't know at this time. However, any changes that they make that increase the funding envelope for transit is a positive thing. The removal of that 10% discount right now, we have to fund that 10% from the tax levy. Based on our 2012 background study, that was about $300,000. So that would be $300,000 of tax levy money that would no longer have to go to support transit. The one thing, though, to keep in mind, if they open this up and they expand it so that we're able to grow transit the way we would like to, there will be an impact on our operating budget, because we have to then fund it. Transit right now, I think the cost recovery is about 30 cents for every dollar we spend on the operating side. So as we expand transit, it will put pressure on the operating budget. One of the things that we would be looking to the province for would be assurances that they're going to continue the gas tax funding, because right now we get about $2.4 million a year. That goes primarily towards capital in transit. We would then be able to use that towards the operating cost to help mitigate some of those impacts.
Mayor Burton, as I've indicated, the Development Charges Act includes a requirement that the increase in the need for a service attributable to anticipated growth must not result in the level of service exceeding the average level of that service provided in the municipality over the previous 10 years. Under the bill, for services to be prescribed by regulation, the estimate for the increase in need is forward rather than backward looking. This will allow municipalities to plan for anticipated levels of those services rather than being limited to the average levels of service of the previous 10 years.
Just doesn't want to change it.
We're having some technical
problems.
here.
It shouldn't be that hard.
This one right here.
No, it's not doing anything for us.
They are having technical difficulties.
I don't know. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Magic touch.
Magic touch. So again, moving for prescribed services, moving away from that 10-year historical average is a good thing right now. On a lot of our soft services, including transit, recreation, et cetera, we have to look at the average service level over the prior 10 years as opposed to what we need going forward to service growth. Right now, we don't know what services will be prescribed. I think the province will be looking to that working group again to work through some of the details for this regulation. The other thing we don't know is what requirements will be put in place on our background studies. So how will we determine what our future-looking service standard is? How will we justify that? What will they be looking for when we're challenged to prove that that's the required level of service? All of these details haven't been worked out yet.
So, Mayor Burton, the bill amends the Act by adding a new section, and that new section stipulates that a municipality shall not impose, directly or indirectly, a charge related to a development or a requirement to construct a service related to development, except as permitted by the Act or another Act, or as permitted in these regulations which are yet to come, which may provide for some exceptions. So essentially what this means is the province is saying that the DC Act under this bill is contemplated to be essentially a complete code for what a municipality is able to collect for capital costs associated with increased demand for services caused by growth.
So putting this requirement in the Act isn't expected to have too much of an impact on the town. We haven't traditionally had a lot of voluntary payments. We did, though, have one with the minutes of settlement for North Oakville, the $5 million that we got that we put towards the town share of 16-mile sports complex. We've recently had one for some transit services with First Golf. If this goes in the way we think, we likely would not be able to enter into those types of agreements. a lot of municipalities use this to help subsidize the cost of growth, because right now, growth doesn't pay for growth. And this is one tool that some municipalities have used to lessen the burden on the municipality. The changes that are proposed to the legislation don't bring us to growth paying for growth. So this is not seen as a positive thing for us.
I can think of a couple of cases where it amounted to a heck of a lot of money in Halton at the regional level, and was the occasion of quite the fight. This would seem to undercut our financial plan policy in the regional OP.
I think it would. For the town, it's not as much of an impact, but for the region, definitely. It does take away a tool that we have. It could make it unaffordable to grow, because what you're doing is putting those costs onto taxpayers, and you're shouldering the burden. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out for some municipalities and for the region.
Is there any sign of any ability to compel, like, let's take the the big case that happened three years ago was the region was unable to finance its portion of the infrastructure and said that it was therefore going to wait until it could, and the developers wound up financing the region's portion, which amounted to another $7,000 or $8,000. Presumably this removes the option of moving growth ahead, but I'm not seeing anything here that compels the region to then proceed to find the ability to finance the piece it can't finance. Would you concur?
I would concur with that. Some of these details will have to be worked through, but from what we've seen, there's nothing that compels us to move forward with growth with the ability to use this tool taken away.
Maybe the province can borrow the missing piece. Anyway, thank you. Go ahead.
Still haven't mastered.
Councillor Hutchins.
We apologize. We're continually to...
No, it's okay. I'm trying to get my head around this. Does this mean that if we don't have the money to grow, we can't charge for things, we are disinclined to increase our taxes, therefore we just say no? So the province then, are we not in crossing the province who want us to grow, like places to grow? I mean, there is nothing they can do to force us to have to pick up the extra.
Through Mayor Burton, I believe where that portion of the act was really directed was towards municipalities who were leveraging additional payments per household to actually do things of a municipal interest. So, for example, there was a municipality not very far from us here in Oakville who had a levy for many years, which was under Section 110, voluntary payments, was about $2,000 per unit, and it was monies that was used by the municipality to fund other things. In some cases, they're 10% discount, as well as other facilities which that municipality did not tend to have. So that's what I think the province was really going at there. In the case, and this will be the interesting one, as Mayor Burton has referred to, is what will happen in an instance like the regional Halton, where it's not that we're saying we need that money so we can build something we're not entitled to. It becomes an issue. We do not have the money at the region to build and advance certain infrastructure. That's where voluntary payments have come in to assist the region. So what I think this was blocking was one thing. What it may be also dealing with is something else on a negative basis.
Right. So for the benefit of the public and maybe new councillors, let's just arbitrarily say that when you build a big set of pipes and major roads at the regional level. It's to service residential and employment. And if you imagine, for the sake of the example, that 20% of the land is going to be residential, 80% is going to be residential and 20% is going to be employment. For the sake of this example, 20% of the cost of the infrastructure is not to be paid for by the residential developer. And so classically, the regions, Halton included, will be the ones, when they can afford to put up the money for the 20% of the infrastructure. What Halton has said is, we're a little short right now, we don't have that money, and so we're not going to build it yet, and so you're going to have to wait over here, Mr. Residential Guy, until we're able to fund our piece. And they've wanted to get into production so badly that they've said, we'll fund that. And this, as it's described here, would appear to threaten that.
Well, I understood that, but so this potentially is a huge blocking thing for any development happening if we don't happen to have the cash in hand to decide to allow it to be developed.
One of the possibilities to be explored is, has the province produced something that could have an unintended consequence that would assist a hypothetical community somewhere that didn't want to grow to say, well, thanks very much, but we're not able to participate. Sorry. I think it started out as an effort to prevent things like might have happened in a hypothetical other community along the lines of, can't get to your project, what would it take to get to my project? Well, I'm spending all my time trying to fund an arena for an NHL team that I hope to get. Well, what would it take to get you to focus on me? Well, about $8,000 a house, I think, was the number in that particular hypothetical case. And they paid it because the market is hot and they could afford it, but they resented it. And this may be the result of that. It's not sure. It's not clear, not everybody's saying, no one's saying what the real motive is. But what we're noticing today is it could have this other consequence that there may be municipalities somewhere would welcome that unintended consequence. And there may be builders somewhere who wouldn't like it. So this legislation this may not be fully cooked, I'm starting to think. Please carry on.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So the current act permits but does not require area-specific development charges within specified areas of a municipality. This provides flexibility to municipalities to develop area-specific bylaws, if required, to meet the growth needs of a municipality or customized to specific parts of a municipality if required. Under Bill 73, mandatory area rating would be introduced through regulation for prescribed services within prescribed areas of prescribed municipalities.
Okay. So that means we could be forced to have more than one bylaw. What we don't know yet is how this power would be used. So if it was used to incent growth, one of the things that we put forward in our submission to the province when they had the consultation was, as Doug said, right now municipalities have the ability to use area-specific charges if they wish. We would have preferred that they left it that way. What this will do was allow the province to prescribe areas. Whether they'll choose Oakville, we don't know, or what types of services they will prescribe. But if they use this to incent growth, what they're really doing then is moving some of the growth costs onto the taxpayers, because the cost of growth is the cost of growth. It's not going to change. If we reduce the development charge in an area to entice development, those costs have to be borne by someone else, and they can't be shifted under the DCA to other growth areas. It has to be the taxpayer. So this will have a negative impact on the existing tax base to allow growth to happen. On the other hand, if they were to take an area and say, do an area-specific charge for this area because there's all these services that are needed, and that pushes the charge up, it might actually be a disincentive to growth, because the development community might say that it just doesn't work for them. The costs are too significant, they can't make their profit. So we really don't know yet how this would be used or how far the province will take this, but it could have a negative impact on us.
So Nancy, you and Ray would have probably the best experience base or awareness of the operation of the two-zone, we had the two-zone DC program at the region, HUSP and non-HUSP. So do you want to, for the sake of the public and maybe new councillors, maybe get a little deeper into that to explain HUSP and non-HUSP? That was the Halton Urban Structure Plan and the areas not in the Halton Urban Structure Plan. So
I can speak a little bit about it. I don't have a lot of details on it, but what they did was they had two separate rates depending on the amount of service that was required in an area. And what that does is it increases the charge in that area. So that's what they're looking at here, but they're actually, in that case, Halton Region decided to do that. What they're saying here is that they'll force us to do that if they so choose.
I'm not sure which regional OP it goes back to, and I believe it goes back into the early 90s when growth was going up to Milton. That was considered the Halton urban structure and parts of North Oakville. And with those particular developments, Glen Abbey, the areas in Milton, it not only required pipes, sewer and water pipes, but also major plant expansions. And that was considered part of the Halton Urban Structure Plan. And so they had a special rate that allowed these new areas to come on stream. Developments that were happening within the existing areas, say south of the QEW or in parts of the older part of Milton or Burlington, and where existing capacity existed, it had a much lower rate because it did not include the plant expansion. So with the new major growth that was coming, it had a much higher DC that it had to pay.
Right, so the piece I can supply is, it used to be a custom, as I understand it, that you didn't expand the urban boundary until at least 75% of the existing area had been developed. And in the 90s, developers who owned a lot of land in Milton and perhaps in North Oakville thought it desirable to leapfrog up and bring those lands into development. And a very expensive pipe was required to run lake water up to Milton as an example of the extra cost. And they were anxious to not wait for 75% to be achieved. Those of us who were here battling over the expansion of the urban boundary in Oakville, north of Dundas, will remember we spent quite a few months arguing that Oakville south of Dundas was not 75% complete, and therefore the urban boundary expansion to the north was premature. The developers argued at the time they knew it would be more expensive and they would willingly pay the extra costs, and that's how we got to the HUSP, non-HUSP DC rates. The best part of the story, and the reason I'm glad for the chance to tell it, is having enticed everybody into the game, they then have done nothing since but complain about how expensive it was and how DCs are too high. I just love that part. So thank you very much for setting that up on the T-ball.
The Mid-Halton plant, the major pipe, the new outlets into Lake Ontario, those are what drove up and, as you said, allowed those developments to proceed.
Councillor Hutchins.
So, again, if according to this plan, they're going to require us to have two separate charges based on whether we're going to have expansion of the sort of the major infrastructure like sewers and water, or just expanding for minor applications like subdivisions.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't know yet what they're going to use this for. They did, during the consultation, they talked about the use of DCs to incent growth, which makes me think that might be where they're going with this. But at this time, we don't know how they plan to use it.
If you review the literature, especially the stuff written by the builders and developers, but also some stuff by non-governmental organizations who are in the field lobbying for social housing and affordable housing, you'll see a glib assertion running through all these that when you intensify in an urban core, of course it's like obvious, they will say, that there's no need to collect the DCs there because the infrastructure's already there, and therefore there's no need to be collecting it. And so this would be my suspicion of where they're going with it. The flaw with this assumption is that most of that infrastructure is either at capacity or near the end of its life, and we do need development charges in order to put the new intensification on it. But the people who are arguing for this are not interested in that particular part of the picture. So there's, again, this is, well, as I do like to say, there is work left to do in terms of protecting the taxpayer and the residents from the deleterious aspects of growth. Commissioner.
I just wanted to emphasize Nancy's point that in the consultations that we attended, there was a very definite theme that the DCs could be used as an incentive. And we argued that the DCs are supposed to be covering the cost of growth. It's not doing that, so how could you use them as an incentive? The arithmetic doesn't work out. But that was an ongoing theme, and we would draw that to your attention.
That expression, use DCs for incentives, is code for use property tax money for incentives. That's exactly what it is. And we need to fight it. I'm hoping through this special council meeting that we will spread the awareness and get the resistance going that this needs. Let's keep going.
We're a team.
We just have three more areas to cover off under this part of the presentation, Mayor Burton. New background study requirements. Under the bill, the development charge background study shall include consideration of the use of more than one development charge bylaw. So that's something that needs to be considered to reflect different needs for services in different areas. And the background study must also have an asset management plan. The asset management plan shall deal with all assets whose capital costs are proposed to be funded under the DC bylaw and demonstrate that all the assets are financially sustainable over their full life cycle. In other words, the legislation will require that new infrastructure must be incorporated in the existing asset management plans of the municipality.
Okay, so the first requirement to look at area-specific ones is in addition to the prescribed one in the previous slide. So what they'll make us do as part of our background study, we'll have to look at whether we should have more than one bylaw. And at this time, we don't know yet how they're going to make us report on that, what process we have to follow, but they're saying we will need to look at that. The one that's really going to be interesting is the asset management plan. Asset management plans are a really good thing. They're sound financial planning. You need to do that as a town, a municipality. We do plan for our infrastructure renewal. So right now, as we budget for a new facility, we will budget the ongoing maintenance and replacement of that facility. We'll budget for equipment replacement in our operating budget as transfers to reserves. We also have that 1% capital levy that we use towards infrastructure renewal. We don't know yet what the requirements will be. They say that they could be prescribed as to how we show that we are financially sustainable and budgeting for the life cycle of these assets throughout their life. But what this could do is actually put a cap on the charge for municipalities, because on the one hand, if they open it up, if I was to use transit as an example, right now our development charge study, we have $11 million in transit in our background study. That's the amount we could collect in DCs. A lot of that was going to pay for past service levels because we had a negative balance. But going forward in our transportation master plan, it identified $101 million worth of capital needs for transit to get to where we want to go with a 20% modal split. If this opens up and we can get that $100 million of transit through development charges, we are going to have to demonstrate that we are budgeting for the maintenance and replacement of all of that equipment. We're going to have to demonstrate that in our operating budget, we're budgeting for the cost of operating it, the bus drivers, the fuel, all of those things. So in actual fact, you might be able to get what you need, but can you afford it? And that's kind of what this may do. But what it is doing, you'll notice any kind of funding that comes out from the province, you have to tie it to show that you have an asset management plan. It's really looking at that infrastructure gap, because what a lot of municipalities have done is they've built things, but they haven't planned on how to maintain it or replace it. We haven't done that in Oakville, but this is something, I think this is what they're trying to get around.
Yeah, those other municipalities spend a lot of their time asking the federal government and the provincial government to pay for those gaps. And this is one of the ways the province is responding, which is to say, wait a minute, where's your work? But we're the good kids. We've looked after this. It's a point of pride for this council that we've looked after it.
It definitely is. The one other thing this may do, and we're not quite sure how it will work, but right now you have a funding envelope for your services and you identify the projects. It's a little bit fluid. You can substitute or you can move things around. What we don't know is now when you do this and you bring forward your projects and then you have to show how you've incorporated those in your asset management plan. If you were to make a change to what you've put forward, how would we go about doing that? Do we have to open up the bylaw? Do we have to bring a new asset management plan forward? We really don't know at this point. All of those types of details are going to have to be worked through by the time they get to the regulations.
So it's more evidence that there's work left to be done, but maybe not that welcome.
That's sort of the underlying theme of what I'm saying today. There's a lot of work still left to be done.
Okay, let's go on.
Particularly on the DC side of things.
Oh, sorry.
I give up.
I'm sorry, I have to mull this over. Could this dual zoning bylaws be used to stop growth? I mean, for instance, there may be a developer wanting to put, I'm thinking of a concrete matter, for instance, in Midtown, for instance, where, as I understand it, the sewer capacity is that capacity. So before anything can be further expanded there, there's going to be a major new sewer trunk lines having to be put in. So conceivably, if a municipality decided they didn't want growth there, they could raise the DCs on that area higher than the surrounding areas, because we need to have major capital, because everything else is at max. Am I making sense here?
In theory, that's an option, and it's probably not the consequence the province is expecting, but, you know, in terms of what they've written, you know, on a theoretical basis, it looks like you could make, by concentrating costs to the area where they're needed, you could eliminate, you know, and I'm sure there's developers who are not in the let's say, Midtown area, who would feel it was unfair that if they thought they were contributing in any way to the capacity for the Midtown area.
And certainly we've heard that argument, but on the same token, once you bring in, for example, with Midtown, the types of things that will be in Midtown, the transportation hub, employment, those are still things that are of a general benefit to all new people coming to Oakville. So we try not to look at these things on that isolated basis that says, you know, this can only go against those, because in some cases it would be cost prohibitive. But on the same token, you always got to remember too, with your DC bylaw, your DC bylaw can be taken to the Ontario Municipal Board. And if it looks like your development charge bylaw has been used as a tool to prohibit, that can also be struck down.
And one of the beauties of that, or in inverted commas, is when your DC bylaw is appealed to the board, It can only be reduced. So the jeopardy is that the taxpayer could.
No, for example, we have a DC for the parking garage in downtown Oakville. What I heard all during the North Oakville discussion with developers in the last round was, why should our developments pay? Because some of your, folks will go downtown. They will use facilities, so it's,
We are not a loose association of tiny little separate cells. We are a town in full, up to now, that's been the policy of the town.
I understand that, but now you're going to be forced to have potentially 2 different DCs for different areas.
Maybe.
Under Bill 73, Mayor Burton, if a development consists of one building that requires more than one building permit, the development charge for the development will be payable when the first building permit is issued, and it would apply to all subsequent permits for that building.
So this is likely intended towards larger tower-type developments. What we don't know yet is what they're going to deem to be that first permit, because right now for the town, if they're applying for a permit just for underground parking, we don't charge the development charges at that time. We charge them when the full foundation is in, because it's very early in the process and you don't necessarily even know how many units there will be. So this could actually end up making developers pay their development charges earlier than they currently do. The other thing, though, is if they're doing a development and they've applied for that permit and they've paid at that rate, and then there's more units at the end of the day, they'll always get that lower rate. So for us, if there's a new DC bylaw in the interim or the annual indexing, we'll lose out on that additional revenue. So we don't totally know what impact this would have on us. If you had a development such as, well, what was called Rain before, where you have 2 towers, they applied separately for those, but in theory, they could apply up front as one permit for both towers and build later. It's cash flow for them as well, though, because they're giving it to us. So we don't really know how this will play out, but that's the potential. Want me to turn it? Oh,
And you
sorry.
can see potential fights over what constitutes one building.
Absolutely.
This is our last substantive point, and we alluded to this earlier. The bill introduces requirements for more detailed reporting, and there are additional powers of provincial oversight. The Treasurer's annual financial statement relating to DC bylaws and reserve funds shall be available to the public and must include, for the preceding year, statements identifying all assets whose capital costs were funded under the DC bylaw during the year, and the manner in which any capital cost not funded under the bylaw was or will be funded. The statement must also have statements as to the opening and closing of balances of the reserve funds and of the transactions relating to those reserve funds, and a compliance statement that the municipality did not impose, directly or indirectly, a DC charge or a requirement to construct a service related to development except as permitted by the Act. In addition, the Minister of Municipal Affairs is provided broad powers to inquire into any or all of the municipality's affairs, financial and otherwise, and investigate whether a municipality has complied with the provisions of the Act. The Minister is also authorized to require the municipality to pay the costs of any such investigation.
So the town does comply with the current requirements. During the consultation, it became evident that there are municipalities that don't currently comply, and this was something that the development community raised quite a bit during the whole consultation process, that residents should be able to know that what they paid for when they purchased that home, that those assets are built. So I suspect this is sort of coming out of that line of thinking. We comply now. This will put more of a burden on us. This, along with the cash in lieu and the Section 37, will put more of a burden on my staff because we'll now have to track all of this. Right now, we report annually. There'll be a report in June that goes to ASC. Right now, it's based on a project basis. So we show the opening and ending balance of the reserve funds. We show all the projects that we funded using development charges and any other funding. Now we'll have to do it asset by asset. So this is increasing transparency. So, you know, we said we needed to build this particular asset. Yes, we built it, but it will put more of a burden on us.
So the first bullet point would almost have appeared to have been something you could call the Alan Elgar provision, because it was calling for a breakout of who paid for what, and Alan likes to ask that question almost every time anything comes in front of us, right? So you're at least well-trained to that part of it.
You will be clearly able to see who's paying for what.
But I have to stop and wonder, I'm just willing to bet you that that's not in there because of Alan. And I'm wondering if there's some hidden purpose in there that you'd like to speculate on.
I'm not totally sure. The thing that, did you want to speak, Gord? Commissioner Lalonde was just saying, so it could be, you know, in our background study, we identify all the things we're going to do. Then we're going to show that we've done them. If we don't do them, that's going to stand out as well. So that could be one of their agendas. But it's really that transparency and accountability to show that we built this asset with DCs, and I'm not sure what else.
Yeah, now that, just for the public, it's important to footnote here, though, that when something is charged for and not built, a credit goes back to the developer. It's not like there's no taking or profit on development charges, right?
That's very important to note. So if we collected for a specific thing and we weren't able to build it in that time frame, there would be a positive balance in that reserve. And when we do our next background study, that positive balance is your starting point. So whatever it says you can collect, they deduct that positive balance from it. So it's not like it's money that the municipality got. It's just simply money that has been collected for a purpose and not yet completed.
Yeah, the word "yet" is the key word. Councillor Elgar.
Yeah, with everything you've said, do we need a new accounting system to track this? Like SAP or something, like which tracks assets and depreciation and?
No, we can do that through J.D. Edwards. We have quite a robust asset management system right now. So even though we're reporting on a project, we know what assets are being built within a specific project, and those are put onto our asset registry once they're done under PSAB. So we have all that information. It's just a case of then tying it back and reporting on it asset by asset in that current year.
Okay, but that's good to hear. So our J.D. Edwards will track what you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a lot more work. Thank you.
Oh, it's not working again?
No.
What did it just do? Okay. I don't know, I must have the special touch today.
I admire it. General conclusions.
Did you want me to speak to it, or do you want me to?
Yes, I haven't seen that.
Okay, sorry. So just in general, just general conclusions, a lot of these changes will increase transparency and accountability. That's a good thing. We support that. But really, I think as you've heard today from each of my comments, it's too soon to know what the impact of these changes will be. There's a lot of work to be done. They're striking a working group that's going to be looking at a lot of these technical issues, looking at how these calculations will be done, and that will then inform the regulations that will be passed. So at this point in time, it's too soon to say what the impact will be on us.
The usual legislative process is a bill goes through 2 readings and then gets referred to standing committee. This bill just received second reading on April the 21st, but I don't believe it has yet been scheduled to any standing committee of the province for clause-by-clause review. Following committee review, then typically there's third reading at the legislature and then royal assent and then proclamation, but that's down the road.
So should we be looking to attempt to bring information to the attention of the committee as they provide clause-by-clause reading to improve the bill?
That would be our best opportunity, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Demoff.
You mentioned quite a bit about transit, and I'm just wondering if there's anything in here that has any impact on our active transportation projects, and in particular the timing of them, because I know sometimes building a sidewalk where there's a need doesn't necessarily mesh up with when the DCs can be spent, and I'm just wondering if there's anything in here that will help us move forward on some of those
Through you, Your Worship, no, there's not. What we don't know with transit, whether it will now become a new transportation category, which then could change the whole services related to a road, which our active transportation is part of. We don't know what changes there are, but there's nothing specifically in the proposed changes.
Anything else?
That concludes our presentation, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for the very good presentation, and thank you, Council, for the robust discussion. And I thank the members of the public for their interest in this. It is, after all, the wallets of the members of the public that may be in jeopardy in some of these changes being contemplated down at Queen's Park. And I think it's clear that Council will do everything we can to protect those wallets. Mr. Green, you rose. Did you have something?
Just in response to Councillor Demoff's question about the active transportation, a number of the attributes with respect to the arterial road, the system, the roads that we're responsible for through DCs, most of the active transportation, such as cycleways, sidewalks, are included as part of the road projects. So there is a component. There's nothing new or enhanced through the current legislation. But I didn't want Council not thinking there was not contributions towards active transportation. There are.
All right. Councillor Adams.
Just want to ask our staff, what's the process that you're going to use with working with the other municipalities within Halton on responding to these things? Is there going to be a joint statement in any way, or are we going it alone on each of the matters?
Through you, Mayor Burton, at this point in time, I'm not aware of an exact plan that is going for regionally. The area CAOs are getting together in 2 weeks' time, and this will be part of that topic.
Okay, and when do we get all the reports back? You know, all the discussion that we've had today, when do we get it back here? For example, like the parkland dedication being a top matter of consideration and so forth.
Councillor, could you be more specific about what you're looking to see back?
As I understood from when we started the discussion today, I understood our staff to say they were collecting points of interest, and I think there were a number of good points of interest discussed, and I understood them to say that they were going to take those points of interest and come back to us with a further report, or further reports or report.
So,
I can respond
Commissioner Lalonde.
to part of your question. Over the course of the next year, these workshops that we have been alluding to will be going out as the province tries to gather information on the DCs. We expect there will be a number of initiatives led by AMO and consultations with different groups across the province. We'll be participating in those. It's my expectation that we'll be bringing a report on the progress of those and things that we should continue to look at to you in the fall on the DC aspect of things. I believe there are separate initiatives underway for the planning side.
And with respect to specific issues such as the cash in lieu of parkland, which is actually a fairly major, I would see that as being something coming back from planning in the fall to council as to what the implications and how we might, what policy changes we may wish to look at within whatever the final legislation turns out to be. But there will be comments that we'll bring back a report either through a collective group or individually as a town with respect to specific comments, probably the next cycle of council. But as Commissioner Lalonde said, with respect to the development charges, that really is going to be more of an ongoing consultation process.
Okay, so we'll see a report back for us to endorse a position in the next month. Okay, thank you. That's great.
So I just want to make sure that's clear. I think it's vital that the council take a position on some of these impacts that are adverse and seek opportunities to change the legislation. And so our offices need to work together to bring that back to council as soon as possible, I would think. And so I just wanted to make sure the public understood that we see this as urgent. Okay? So with that, we need a mover to receive the information. Councillor Knoll, all in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. We need a mover to rise and report. Councillor Lapworth, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and received the presentation on Provincial Review, Land Use Planning and Appeal System, Bill 73, and adopted the recommendation contained in item 1 as noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for the report, please. Councillor Elgar and Councillor O'Meara, all in favor? Opposed, if any. The report is adopted. Could we have a mover and seconder for the bylaw? Councillor Duddick and Councillor Robinson. This is the confirmatory bylaw for the meeting. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is adopted. That completes our agenda. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. It's great working with you, and I think we are gathering what we need to do something good for our people of the town of Oakville. We're adjourned.